I built my family's small-town diner into a $15 million restaurant empire. So imagine sitting at a celebration dinner, hearing my own dad raise a toast and say, "Cheers to your sister, our new CEO," handing her everything I worked years to build. I'm Evelyn, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Was my family right, or did they make the biggest mistake of their lives? Drop a comment and let me know what you think. I had never imagined myself standing in front of Carter's Place again, suitcase in hand, after building a thriving career in the heart of Wall Street. Leaving behind my comfortable life in New York wasn't an easy decision, but when Mom called with a trembling voice, admitting the family diner was on the brink of foreclosure, I knew exactly where I had to be. Asheville had always been charming, nestled between misty mountains and bustling with tourists seeking authentic cuisine. But today the town felt different, heavy with the weight of my family's uncertain future. When I pushed open the familiar diner doors, the bell chimed softly, a comforting echo from childhood days spent serving coffee and pie after school. Yet nostalgia quickly faded as I scanned the empty booths, peeling wallpaper and chipped counters. My heart sank further at the sight of Dad hunched over the counter, poring over stacks of unpaid bills. "Evelyn, you made it," he said quietly, his voice carrying a blend of relief and shame. Mom emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. She embraced me tightly, holding on longer than usual, whispering apologies as though the diner's failure was somehow her personal fault. "It's all right, Mom," I reassured her gently, even though anxiety twisted my stomach into knots. "We're going to figure this out together." As we sat down to discuss the state of affairs, the numbers laid out before me were worse than I anticipated. Debts had piled up dramatically over the past year, local patrons had dwindled, and online reviews complained that Carter's Place was stuck in time. Each detail felt like another brick piled onto my shoulders, and I realized turning this around would take more than money. It required a total rebirth. "What about Andrew?" Dad suddenly asked, glancing at Mom rather than meeting my eyes. "He's finishing his MBA at Wharton, you know. When he returns, he'll be able to take charge. This diner needs someone with real business expertise to lead it." I felt a sting, immediate and sharp. It took all my restraint not to show the hurt clearly etched across my face. Andrew, my younger brother, had always been their golden child. While I'd spent years proving myself on Wall Street, apparently that wasn't enough to convince them of my business capabilities. Andrew's expensive MBA was the family's proudest talking point these days, overshadowing anything I had ever achieved. "I understand Andrew's qualifications," I began carefully, choosing my words deliberately. "But he's not here now, and frankly, we don't have time to wait for him to finish school and gain experience. You called me because you need help immediately, and that's exactly what I intend to do." There was a brief silence, awkward and heavy, until Mom cleared her throat softly. "Of course, sweetheart, we're grateful you're here," she offered hesitantly. But the unspoken hesitation lingered in her eyes. She still doubted my ability to manage this crisis alone. Determined not to let their skepticism discourage me, I spent the evening poring over every piece of financial data available. The solution slowly took shape in my mind, an ambitious plan that involved completely revamping the diner's menu, updating our online presence, and reconnecting with Asheville's vibrant tourism community. Carter's Place needed more than a Band-Aid. It required radical surgery, a vision I was uniquely positioned to bring to life. As the moon rose high, illuminating the quiet streets outside, I sat at my old childhood desk, drafting an email to Meridian Capital. Edward Kingston, a renowned investor, had briefly crossed paths with me in New York. If anyone could appreciate the potential hidden within a small-town diner, it was Edward. I hesitated briefly before clicking send, my finger hovering over the mouse. Taking a deep breath, I finally pressed the button, the email disappearing into cyberspace, carrying with it all my hopes and fears. I lay awake long afterward, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the day's conversations. My parents' doubts echoed painfully, and Andrew's shadow loomed larger than ever. Despite their skepticism, I knew deep down I had made the right decision coming home. This wasn't just about saving a diner. It was about reclaiming my place within a family that had overlooked me for too long. When morning came, sunlight filtering through faded curtains, I reached sleepily for my phone. My heart skipped when I saw an unread email. It was from Edward Kingston. Sitting up sharply, I opened it, scanning quickly. "Evelyn, I'm intrigued. Let's talk possibilities." In that instant, a rush of determination surged through me. Maybe my family didn't fully trust my abilities yet, but soon they would have no choice. I would turn Carter's Place around, no matter what it took. When I first read Edward Kingston's email, a sense of hope I hadn't felt in weeks surged through me. It was the validation I needed to put my bold ideas into action. I knew that Carter's Place couldn't simply be saved. It had to be reborn. I immediately called a meeting with our small but dedicated team, including Sarah Reynolds, our spirited marketing manager, and Mike Thompson, the reliable backbone of operations. Both had known me since childhood, and their loyalty was evident from the moment I shared my ambitious plan. Sarah's eyes lit up when I unveiled the new menu concept: fresh takes on Southern classics combined with healthier, locally sourced ingredients to appeal to Asheville's growing culinary tourism. Mike, ever practical, raised his eyebrows skeptically at first, but quickly warmed to the idea once I explained the potential profit margins and operational improvements. Within weeks, Carter's Place was unrecognizable in the best way possible. Gone were the tired beige walls and outdated decor, replaced by tasteful, vibrant colors and rustic accents. Our new menu, boasting dishes like maple bourbon glazed salmon and heirloom tomato salads, started drawing curious locals and adventurous tourists alike. Thanks to Sarah's savvy social media campaigns, Carter's Place began trending online, first locally, then regionally, attracting attention from food bloggers and influencers. The diner became a must-visit destination overnight, bustling with excited patrons capturing photos of every dish, tagging us enthusiastically, and posting glowing reviews. Each night, as I saw lines forming outside our once-empty diner, pride swelled in my chest. Edward Kingston was quick to notice our growing popularity. Just 2 months after my initial proposal, he arranged a visit. The morning of his arrival, tension buzzed through the diner like electricity. I double-checked everything, from the perfectly plated dishes to the meticulously arranged table settings. Even my parents seemed nervous, hovering uncertainly near the kitchen. Edward arrived exactly on time, greeting me warmly with a firm handshake. He spent hours meticulously examining our operations, tasting multiple dishes, and interviewing both Sarah and Mike. By late afternoon, he had seen enough. He invited me to a quiet corner booth, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Evelyn," he began, setting down his notebook, "I must say I'm thoroughly impressed. You've transformed this place not just into a diner, but into a real culinary experience. Meridian Capital wants to help you turn Carter's Place into a national restaurant chain." The shock of hearing those words nearly knocked the breath out of me. This was the validation I'd been craving. Yet beneath my excitement lingered the thought of my parents' stubborn allegiance to Andrew. Would this finally be enough for them to see me as capable? "Edward, it would be an honor," I said confidently, suppressing my inner uncertainty as I signed the initial agreement. Edward smiled approvingly, nodding in reassurance as he took the signed documents. "You've earned this, Evelyn. Never doubt your talent again." Later, as we celebrated the news, the diner filled with laughter and joyful conversation. Sarah and Mike enthusiastically discussed the coming expansions, buzzing with ideas. My parents stood quietly in the background, their expressions difficult to read. Eventually, Dad approached me cautiously, placing a comforting but hesitant hand on my shoulder. "You've really pulled this off," he said softly. "I'm proud of you, Evie." Before I could reply, Mom quickly interjected, her voice tinged with excitement and an unmistakable undertone of relief. "Speaking of wonderful news, Andrew just called. He'll be back from Wharton next week. Isn't it perfect timing? He'll be able to jump right in and take things even further." Her words landed like a cold wave, washing away the warmth of Dad's rare praise. My heart sank instantly. the familiar ache of disappointment returning with painful clarity. Despite everything, my accomplishments still paled compared to their anticipation of Andrew's return. Even now, after securing a deal that could change our lives forever, they saw him, not me, as the natural heir. I forced a polite smile, nodding gently, pretending not to notice Sarah and Mike exchanging worried glances. The atmosphere shifted subtly, celebratory laughter fading into awkward silence as everyone felt the weight of Mom's announcement. That night, lying awake in my childhood bedroom, I stared at the ceiling, the familiar cracks and shadows offering little comfort. I'd achieved everything I'd set out to do, yet here I was again, overshadowed by Andrew's looming presence. How many more mountains would I need to climb before my parents finally saw me as equal, or better yet, saw me at all? As I drifted into restless sleep, uncertainty clouded my thoughts. Andrew's imminent arrival should have been good news, but instead, it felt like a threat. After everything I had built, the risk of losing it all to my brother, who hadn't spent a single minute in the trenches, made my stomach twist uneasily. Deep down, I knew this fight was far from over, and the biggest challenges were yet to come. 5 years flew by, each moment marked by sleepless nights, endless meetings, and relentless dedication to making Carter's Place more than just a diner. With the backing of Meridian Capital and Edward Kingston's unwavering support, I transformed our humble family restaurant into a nationwide brand. Our revenues soared past the $15 million mark, and Carter's Place had become a household name featured in magazines, television segments, and countless social media posts. Yet, despite the success, there was a shadow I could never quite shake off: Andrew's shadow. My brother returned to Asheville shortly after completing his MBA, exactly as our parents had eagerly anticipated. From the moment he stepped back into our lives, Andrew was hailed like a conquering hero. Though he had never served a single table, never worked a late night at the kitchen stove, and never navigated the daily challenges of running the restaurant, my parents continually praised his fresh business perspective and cutting-edge education. I tried to ignore their comments, convincing myself it was just parental pride, harmlessly misguided. But as Andrew settled into life back home, it became clear this was something deeper. At company events, in interviews with national reporters, and even during investor meetings, my parents insisted on highlighting Andrew as the family's future leader. "Your brother's MBA from Wharton is exactly what we need to take Carter's Place to the next level," Dad declared proudly during a press interview, completely oblivious to the awkward silence that followed. Edward caught my gaze from across the room, his expression sympathetic but stern. After the press left, Edward approached me discreetly. "Evelyn, just know I see what's really going on here," he assured quietly. "Remember, you're the reason we invested in the first place. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." His words brought comfort, but it wasn't enough to erase the sting of my family's subtle dismissal. Still, I kept my head high, focusing on the business I had painstakingly built. Everything came to a head one warm June evening. To celebrate our latest successful quarter, Dad organized a lavish family dinner at our flagship Asheville restaurant, inviting local dignitaries and our top executives. The dining room buzzed with excitement, filled with cheerful conversation and clinking glasses. Yet beneath the jovial atmosphere, I sensed an undercurrent of tension. Midway through dinner, Dad stood up, gently tapping his wine glass with a spoon, signaling for attention. The room quickly quieted, eyes turning toward him expectantly. "Tonight, we celebrate an incredible milestone for Carter's Place, and it's all thanks to the amazing dedication and vision within this family," Dad began warmly. I felt my heart flutter hopefully, thinking perhaps this was finally my moment of recognition. Instead, Dad smiled warmly at Andrew, raising his glass proudly. "Cheers to your sister, our new CEO." A wave of applause filled the room, my ears ringing as I processed what he'd just said. He'd clearly meant Andrew, my younger brother, who sat beaming proudly, looking every bit the part of a freshly minted CEO. I swallowed hard, forcing a polite smile despite the storm raging inside me. Andrew hadn't raised a finger to earn that moment, yet he basked in the applause and congratulations from everyone around him. I wanted to shout, to remind them all of who had saved the diner, of who had poured every ounce of heart and soul into creating this success. Instead, I sat frozen, barely able to breathe, betrayed by the very family I'd sacrificed everything to protect. When the noise died down, I quietly excused myself, pushing through the crowd toward the exit. Outside, the cool night air filled my lungs, but it did little to ease the tightness in my chest. Leaning against the cold brick wall, tears of frustration blurred my vision. Years of work, dedication, and love, and still it wasn't enough. My parents had made it clear, unintentionally or not, that they saw Andrew as inherently more capable, simply because of his gender, his degree, or perhaps his status as their beloved son. But this time, something within me hardened into resolve. I refused to quietly accept the injustice any longer. I had built Carter's Place from the ground up, and I wouldn't allow my brother or my parents to diminish everything I'd achieved. Wiping the tears from my cheeks, I straightened my posture, feeling newfound determination burning within me. Tomorrow, Andrew would officially join the management team. He was confident, charismatic, and convinced he had nothing left to learn. But I knew better. His arrogance and lack of real-world experience would inevitably create problems. And when it did, I would no longer stand silently in the background. Walking away from the restaurant that night, I knew one thing for sure. The next few weeks would be defining, not just for Carter's Place, but for my family and my future. If my parents couldn't see my value yet, then perhaps it was time I showed them exactly what they stood to lose. From the moment Andrew stepped into Carter's Place HQ, his presence was impossible to ignore. With his polished shoes, sharp suits, and flashy smile, he walked through our halls as though he owned the place. Because in his mind, I suppose he did. From day one, he started making changes without consulting anyone, convinced his expensive education made him untouchable. And just as I feared, it didn't take long for his overconfidence to cause real trouble. Within his first week, Andrew abruptly shifted our main supplier to an overseas vendor, convinced he'd found a cost-saving solution. Sarah Reynolds, my dedicated marketing manager, urgently brought the issue to my attention late one evening. "Evelyn, we've got a serious problem," she began cautiously, clearly distressed. "Andrew switched our main produce supplier without due diligence. The new supplier just informed us they can't deliver for another 2 weeks. We're running dangerously low." My stomach dropped. Such a disruption could cripple operations nationwide. I immediately called Mike Thompson, my reliable operations manager, and within minutes we were brainstorming a solution. Together, we scrambled to patch the damage, working late into the night to prevent catastrophe. It wasn't easy, but we managed a temporary fix, paying premium prices to local farmers to maintain our supply. But Andrew didn't stop there. Days later, I discovered he'd also approved a marketing campaign that completely missed our core demographic, alienating loyal customers without attracting new ones. Negative reviews poured in, and revenue quickly dipped. Just 5 days after Andrew's arrival, Edward Kingston summoned both of us for an emergency meeting at our corporate office. The room was filled with tension the moment we entered. Edward, usually calm and composed, appeared genuinely troubled. "Andrew," he began, skipping pleasantries entirely, "I'm deeply concerned about the recent setbacks. I invested in Carter's Place based on Evelyn's strategic direction and proven leadership. Yet since your arrival, we're losing momentum, fast." Andrew stiffened, clearly taken aback by Edward's bluntness. "Edward, transitions always come with a few bumps," he replied defensively. "I've simply implemented practices I learned at Wharton." Edward cut him off sharply. "This isn't a case study in a classroom. Real livelihoods depend on these decisions. Your reckless choices have jeopardized the entire brand. Evelyn, are you aware of these changes?" I nodded slowly, meeting Edward's intense gaze. I found out after the fact and immediately took corrective actions, but the damage was already done. Edward nodded solemnly, turning his attention back to Andrew. Your sister built Carter's place from the ground up. My investment was in her vision, her proven capability. I'm sorry, Andrew, but your MBA isn't enough. Experience matters. The silence that filled the room was deafening. Andrew's face flushed red, clearly humiliated and angered. He shot me a wounded look, as if blaming me personally for his embarrassment. I wanted to reach out to him, offer some comfort, but how could I console someone who refused to acknowledge their mistakes? As Andrew stormed out, Edward turned to me with deep concern. Evelyn, you need to understand. This investment hinges on your continued leadership. Frankly, if Andrew stays at the helm, Carter's place won't survive another year. Edward's words hit me hard, confirming everything I'd feared. My family's insistence on protecting Andrew's ego had put our entire future at stake. After Edward left, I sat alone in the dimly lit conference room, struggling to untangle the knot of emotions gripping me. I had always valued family unity above everything. But what good was unity if it meant watching everything I'd worked so hard to build collapse? Was it loyalty or fear that kept me silent while Andrew made mistake after mistake? Deep down, I knew the truth. My parents' misguided pride and Andrew's arrogance could no longer dictate my decisions. Late that evening, as dusk settled quietly over Asheville, I stood by my office window overlooking the town I'd loved my entire life. I knew the next decision I made would change everything, possibly fracturing my family forever. But I couldn't sacrifice the diner, our employees' livelihoods, and my integrity, just to shield my family's outdated beliefs. Taking a deep breath, I picked up the phone and called Sarah and Mike. It was time to draw the line clearly, firmly, and without hesitation. I need you both here first thing tomorrow, I told them, my voice steady but determined. We need to talk. I called Sarah and Mike into the conference room late that night, away from the curious eyes of our staff and the uneasy whispers circulating through the office. They walked in silently, sensing immediately that something serious was unfolding. Soon after, Laura Evans, my longtime mentor and trusted confidant, joined us, her eyes warm but somber, reflecting my own turmoil. We're facing a critical situation, I began, taking a slow breath to steady my nerves. Andrew's recent decisions are putting everything we've built at risk. Edward Kingston made it clear today. His investment is only secure if I remain in leadership. Mike exchanged a knowing glance with Sarah before leaning forward slightly. Evelyn, we've always believed in your leadership, but what exactly are you suggesting? I hesitated briefly, feeling the weight of the next words. If my parents refuse to acknowledge the damage Andrew is causing, I'm prepared to establish a new restaurant chain, independent from Carter's place. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise, but determination quickly replaced shock. If it comes to that, you know I'll stand with you, she affirmed firmly. Mike nodded in agreement, his voice steady. We've always followed your vision, Evelyn. If you leave, we follow. Just as a feeling of relief started to settle in, the door swung open abruptly. Andrew stood in the doorway, his face flushed with anger. So, this is why you're all here so late, plotting behind my back? He demanded, striding into the room, eyes flashing with accusation. No one's plotting anything, Andrew, I replied calmly, despite the tension crackling between us. We're discussing serious issues affecting the future of the business, issues caused directly by your decisions. Andrew laughed bitterly, shaking his head in disbelief. Issues? You mean minor setbacks? Every transition has them. You're overreacting because you're threatened by me. I'm not threatened, I said evenly, keeping my voice carefully measured. I'm frustrated. You've ignored advice, disregarded warnings, and made decisions without thinking about the consequences. The damage is clear, and I won't stand by quietly any longer. Andrew's voice rose sharply, pride fueling his anger. You think this company can survive without the Carter name behind it? You might have built something decent, Evelyn, but it's the family legacy that people trust. Take that away, and everything falls apart. I felt a rush of anger rise inside me, but forced myself to maintain composure. People trust Carter's Place because of its quality, not just a family name. They trust it because of my hard work and the dedication of people like Sarah and Mike. If I built it once, Andrew, I can do it again. This time without you. A stunned silence filled the room as Andrew stared at me, speechless. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. He opened his mouth as if to respond, but quickly turned away, storming out without another word. The room was quiet after he left, the tension still lingering. Laura finally spoke softly, breaking the silence. That needed to happen, Evelyn. But now you have an important choice ahead. I knew she was right. My parents would soon hear what happened, and this time there would be no avoiding the confrontation I dreaded for years. Either they would finally see reason, or I'd be forced to step away from the very business I'd poured my heart into. Later that evening, long after Sarah and Mike had left, I arranged to meet privately with Edward Kingston. We sat across from each other at a quiet cafe near downtown Asheville, sipping coffee well past midnight. I laid out detailed plans I'd been quietly preparing, plans for a new, innovative restaurant chain, free from family politics. Edward studied my proposal carefully, impressed but cautious. Evelyn, your vision has always inspired me. Meridian Capital invested because we believed in you, and that's still true. But before you move forward on this path, you need to face your family directly. I looked away momentarily, staring at the quiet streets beyond the cafe window. The thought of confronting my parents again was painful, yet necessary. I nodded slowly, knowing Edward was right. Arrange a meeting, he suggested firmly. One last chance for your family to make the right decision. They deserve to know exactly what they stand to lose. Edward's words echoed in my mind as I drove home that night. The quiet streets of Asheville offered little comfort, each corner reminding me of childhood memories and family bonds now strained to breaking. But my resolve had hardened. Carter's Place was more than just a family legacy. It was my legacy. No matter what tomorrow held, I knew one thing was certain. I had finally drawn the line, and there was no turning back. The following morning, the atmosphere inside our conference room at Carter's Place headquarters felt charged, like a gathering storm about to break. Sitting across from my parents, with Andrew fidgeting nervously beside them, I watched Edward Kingston lay out a stack of documents on the polished wooden table. Laura Evans sat next to me, her reassuring presence offering comfort amidst the tension. Edward leaned forward, his voice calm but direct. "I'll be blunt," he began, scanning the room solemnly. My investment was always based on Evelyn's vision and leadership. Recent developments have made me question the stability of Carter's Place if this path continues. My parents exchanged anxious glances, clearly sensing the seriousness in his tone. Andrew shifted uncomfortably in his chair, visibly irritated but unsure of how to respond. Before he could speak, Edward continued firmly. "I've seen firsthand the damage from recent decisions. It's clear Andrew isn't ready to lead this operation. Therefore, my condition for moving forward is simple. Evelyn remains the official CEO, or Meridian Capital withdraws its multi-million-dollar investment immediately." His words dropped heavily into the room, and for a moment, nobody spoke. My parents exchanged worried looks, suddenly confronted by the reality they'd chosen to ignore. Andrew, red-faced and defensive, finally broke the silence. "This is ridiculous. You can't just disregard my credentials like this," he protested indignantly, his voice strained. "I have the qualifications. I deserve the chance to lead." Robert intervened quickly, attempting to calm the mounting tension. "Surely there's a compromise here, Edward," he pleaded, his voice strained yet hopeful. "What about having Andrew and Evelyn as co-CEOs? That way the company benefits from both their strengths." I shook my head slowly, disappointment flooding my chest. Despite everything, they still clung stubbornly to their illusions about Andrew's supposed talents. Edward was equally unconvinced. "No," he said firmly. "Shared leadership isn't practical here, especially not when one person's vision created this success and the other nearly derailed it in mere weeks." Andrew visibly bristled, his face reddening with anger. Margaret, still protective, reached gently to calm him, whispering something I couldn't hear clearly. She looked toward Edward again, desperation in her eyes. "Please, Edward," she pleaded softly. "Andrew made mistakes, yes, but he deserves a chance to learn. Evelyn can mentor him." Edward cut her off gently but firmly. "Margaret, running a $15 million operation isn't the place for training wheels. Evelyn's proven herself repeatedly. My position stands firm." I took a deep breath, finally speaking up, my voice steady but firm. "I appreciate your desire to keep the family together, Mom, Dad, but protecting our pride at this stage risks everything I've built. Andrew needs experience, not just a title." Edward nodded approvingly. "Exactly. Evelyn's right. The choice is yours now." Andrew suddenly stood, slamming his palms onto the table, his face twisted with fear, masked as rage, eyes darting from face to face before landing harshly on mine. "This is ridiculous, B," he outed, voice shaking. "You're all seriously considering taking my birthright and giving it to her? After everything you promised me?" "Andrew," Dad said quietly, visibly embarrassed. "This isn't personal." "Isn't it?" Andrew interrupted sharply. "You think she's better than me because she stayed here flipping burgers? I have an MBA from Wharton. I've done everything you expected of me." His voice cracked, revealing the frightened child beneath the confident facade. For a brief second, I felt sympathy for him. He, too, was trapped by our parents' impossible expectations. But sympathy didn't erase accountability. "Andrew, this isn't about credentials or pride," I said softly but firmly. "It's about reality. Your decisions have hurt the business. You weren't ready, and that's not your fault, but it is a fact." Andrew glared at me, betrayal burning bright in his eyes. He stormed out, leaving behind stunned silence and unanswered questions. My parents sat quietly, visibly shaken, absorbing the reality of the ultimatum. Edward stood up, calmly gathering his documents. "I'll give you until tomorrow morning to decide. Evelyn, please keep me updated." With a final reassuring glance, he left the room, leaving my family alone with our fractured relationships. Laura placed a comforting hand on mine, whispering quietly, "You did the right thing, Evelyn." Sometimes family needs tough love to see clearly. As night fell, I sat alone by the window, staring at the quiet streets of Asheville. The diner lights glowed softly in the distance, a gentle reminder of everything I'd poured into this business, every sacrifice, every late night, every painful compromise. The weight of tomorrow's decision pressed heavily upon my shoulders. I knew Andrew was hurting, but I had no regrets about standing firm. It was time my family faced the truth. If they couldn't recognize the value I'd brought to Carter's place, perhaps it was better to move forward without them. No matter their decision, tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new chapter, one defined by merit, respect, and honesty, or the painful necessity of moving on alone. The next morning, I stood in my bedroom at my parents' house, slowly packing my belongings into a suitcase. Each item I folded reminded me of the life I'd lived here: family dinners, long conversations by the fireplace, childhood laughter echoing down the hallways. But now, those memories felt distant and faint, overshadowed by the bitter reality of recent events. I had finally made peace with my decision to leave Carter's place behind. It hurt deeply, but staying without respect, without recognition, simply wasn't an option anymore. Downstairs, the house was unusually quiet, heavy with an unsettling tension. As I zipped up the suitcase, a soft knock echoed at my door. Before I could answer, Sarah and Mike stepped cautiously inside, their faces serious, eyes filled with concern. "Evelyn," Sarah began quietly, glancing at the suitcase on my bed, "are you really sure you want to do this?" "It's the only way they'll understand," I replied softly, trying to mask the exhaustion in my voice. "They need to know I'm serious about this." Mike nodded solemnly. "We've spoken with your parents," he said gently. "They finally seem to realize how much they've underestimated you. Honestly, I've never seen them like this." I wanted to believe him, but years of quiet dismissal left deep scars. It's too little, too late, I whispered, trying to hide the sadness in my voice. Downstairs, muffled voices gradually grew louder. Curious, I made my way to the stairwell, stopping when I heard Andrew's voice, louder than usual and tinged with desperation. Sarah and Mike stood close behind me, equally curious about what was unfolding. "I've tried, Mom. Dad," Andrew said shakily. "I tried everything I learned at Wharton, but theory isn't reality. Evelyn's right, I don't know how to run a business like this." Dad's voice was strained, deeply troubled. "Andrew, we've always believed in you." "But Evelyn believed in herself," Andrew interrupted fiercely. "You trusted me blindly because I was your son. But Evelyn earned every bit of your respect, and you refused to give it to her. If we lose her, we lose everything." His voice cracked with emotion, a raw honesty I had never heard from him before. Silence fell again, punctuated only by my mother's quiet sobs. I glanced at Sarah and Mike, both watching the exchange unfold in silence. "You know he's right, Robert," Mom finally admitted, her voice filled with regret. "All these years, we overlooked Evelyn simply because of tradition and our own biases. What have we done?" The raw emotion in her voice surprised me. It was sincere in a way I'd never heard before. Mike squeezed my shoulder supportively as Sarah reached out, gently taking my hand. Part of me wanted to rush downstairs, comfort them, and forgive everything. Yet my heart still resisted, bruised by betrayal and needing more than words to heal. I quietly picked up my suitcase, brushing past Sarah and Mike with determination. I knew leaving would hurt my parents, but the pain I carried was heavier. If my parents were genuinely ready to understand my worth, they would have to show it, not just say it. Walking downstairs, I found the family room empty now, an eerie quietness replacing the earlier chaos. Outside, I loaded my belongings into my car, hesitating only briefly as I looked back at the home I'd known my entire life. I took a deep breath, climbing into the car before pulling out of the driveway without looking back. Hours later, in a hotel room just outside Asheville, my phone buzzed repeatedly. I ignored it, determined to focus instead on the documents Edward and I had meticulously prepared for the contingency plan, a new chain, free from family politics and outdated traditions. I was ready to launch it immediately, if needed. Yet as darkness fell, curiosity got the better of me. Glancing at my phone, I saw missed calls and messages from both parents and Andrew. There was desperation in their repeated voicemails, something I'd never heard before. Genuine remorse. "Evelyn, please," Mom's voice pleaded through the voicemail. "We made a terrible mistake. We should never have taken you for granted. Please come home and give us a chance to fix this." Dad's voice followed, filled with deep sorrow. "Evie, I'm so sorry. I failed you as a father by letting pride cloud my judgment. We can't afford to lose you. Not the diner, not the family, and certainly not me." I sat back heavily, emotions swirling inside me. This was the first time my parents had truly acknowledged their wrongdoing, openly admitting their mistakes. It was exactly what I'd longed to hear, yet something inside me held back. Was this genuine remorse or simply desperation? Could I trust them again after years of subtle betrayal? Minutes passed slowly, each second heavy with doubt. Then my phone vibrated again, a text from Andrew, short but sincere. "Ev, I messed up badly. You were right all along. If there's still a chance, come home. Carter's place needs you, and so do we." The sincerity in Andrew's words struck a chord deep inside me. He had never admitted fault so openly before, and it showed a humility I'd never imagined in my brother. Yet even now, my heart felt guarded, cautious. Could I truly risk going back to a place that had hurt me so deeply? I spent the rest of the night staring out into the darkness, reflecting on my parents' remorse, Andrew's newfound humility, and my own conflicted heart. Tomorrow, Edward had arranged one final meeting, offering my family one last opportunity to make amends, to finally acknowledge the truth. Deep inside, I knew the moment had arrived. Tomorrow would decide everything, not just the future of Carter's place, but the very fabric of our family itself. Monday morning arrived with a sense of finality hanging in the air. As I stepped into Meridian Capital's imposing headquarters, sunlight spilled through the tall windows, bathing the marble floors in a golden glow. Every step echoed softly in the hallway, each tap of my heels matching my steady heartbeat. Today, the future of Carter's Place and of my family would be decided. Pushing open the conference room door, I felt countless eyes immediately turn toward me. Edward Kingston sat at the far end of the long table, calm and dignified as ever. Beside him, Laura Evans offered an encouraging nod. Sarah, Mike, and several other loyal employees filled one side of the table, their faces hopeful but tense. My family sat opposite them, looking anxious, humbled, and strangely vulnerable. Before I could speak, Dad stood, his voice trembling slightly but sincere. "Evelyn," he began softly, addressing me directly for perhaps the first time, without hesitation or doubt. "Your mother and I owe you a tremendous apology. For too long, we failed to recognize how deeply your dedication, talent, and sacrifices shaped this company. We were wrong to overlook your values simply because of tradition and our own stubborn biases." His voice caught momentarily, heavy with genuine remorse. I felt my throat tighten, taken aback by the depth of sincerity in his words. "You've built something extraordinary," he continued quietly, looking directly into my eyes, "and we nearly destroyed it because we couldn't see beyond our own blinders. I'm deeply, deeply sorry, Evie. If there's still a chance, we'd like you to continue leading Carter's Place, not just as our daughter, but as the rightful CEO you've always been." Mom rose unsteadily beside him, tears streaming openly down her cheeks. "Evelyn," she whispered shakily, "I favored Andrew simply because he was my son. It was unfair and deeply hurtful. I let my own prejudice blind me to your incredible achievements. I can never undo the past, but I beg you for forgiveness. You've always deserved better from us." The raw vulnerability in my parents' voices left the room utterly silent. For a long moment, no one spoke. All eyes shifted to me, awaiting my response. I took a deep breath, collecting my thoughts before finally standing. "I accept your apologies," I began quietly but firmly, "and I appreciate how much courage it took for you to say those words openly. But most importantly, we've all learned something crucial from this painful experience. Each person's worth comes from their actions, their dedication, and the results they achieve, not their gender or outdated expectations." The room filled with quiet murmurs of agreement. Edward Kingston, clearly moved, stood up next. "Evelyn, you've demonstrated remarkable leadership from day one," Edward said firmly, addressing the entire room. "Meridian Capital remains committed to you as permanent CEO. We trust your vision and have no doubt you will continue to succeed." Andrew, who had sat silently with his head down, now looked up, clearly humbled. "Evelyn," he began hesitantly, "I came home believing my credentials alone entitled me to lead. But you showed me clearly that there's a difference between theory and reality. If you'll have me, I want to stay. This time in a role where I can truly learn from you." I met Andrew's gaze, seeing genuine humility in his eyes for the first time. "Of course, Andrew," I replied sincerely. "We're family, and I'd welcome your support." A palpable wave of relief swept through the room. Sarah, Mike, and the rest of our loyal employees visibly relaxed, smiles spreading across their faces. Turning to them, I spoke warmly. "Your loyalty has meant everything to me. Without your unwavering support, none of this would have been possible. From now on, Carter's Place will be built on respect, fairness, and recognition of everyone's contributions, not just mine." The meeting concluded with a collective sigh of relief, the tension that had filled the room evaporating into quiet optimism. Edward shook my hand warmly, murmuring softly, "I knew you'd pull through, Evelyn. You've earned every bit of this." As everyone began dispersing, Mom and Dad approached me again, embracing me tightly, whispering more apologies and promises to make amends. This time, I accepted their embrace fully, feeling a healing warmth begin to wash away years of hurt. Stepping outside into the bright sunlight, I paused, taking a moment to breathe deeply. I watched employees chatting animatedly, my parents talking gently with Andrew, genuine smiles lighting their faces again. Everything felt different now, lighter, clearer, filled with possibilities rather than regrets. My journey hadn't been easy. It had tested every ounce of my strength, resolve, and resilience. Yet standing here today, I felt deeply proud. Justice had prevailed. Recognition had finally come. My family had grown, learned, and emerged stronger. As I walked confidently toward my car, the future stretched before me, bright and full of promise. This was more than just a fresh start. It was the beginning of something far better, built on truth, respect, and the understanding that each person's true worth can never be overlooked again. As I stand here today, looking back on everything that's happened, I realize how much I've grown, not just as a businesswoman, but as a person. The journey taught me that true value isn't determined by a title, a gender, or outdated traditions. Instead, our worth comes from dedication, actions, and resilience in the face of adversity. Maybe you've experienced something similar, felt overlooked, underestimated, or overshadowed. If that's your story, let me remind you of one important truth. Your worth isn't dictated by how others perceive you, but by your ability to stand firm, to believe in yourself, and to fight for what's rightfully yours. So now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated in your family or at work? How did you handle it? Drop a comment below. If you resonated with this story, type 1 in the comments or let me know where you're watching from. And if it didn't click with you, I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts on why that is or where you're joining us from today. Thank you so much for sharing this moment with me. Wherever you are right now, remember, your story matters, your effort matters, and most importantly, you matter.